Hey, how are you? So, previously on this show, we went through the entire process of how to create driver projection screens for a driving scene similar to this. This is a clip from a show that I've got that's in production and being released right now called Oh Dad. And it's this conversation that takes place in a car, and I've got the driving scenes, projected behind them at the various angles and such. And we covered how to do that using a Steam game called BeamNG.drive. Well, there's an additional touch that we're going to cover today, and that is how to get a reflection when you need it, like for a shot like this where the camera's technically outside the car. So to make this really blend into the scene properly, it's nice to have some reflection going by, but not just generic reflection. We're going to actually put reflection on this vehicle that is consistent with what is happening around the vehicle. So if there's a reflection of something on the, side of the car, it's going to correspond to they're passing a mountain over there, that kind of thing. It's pretty crazy the way that this can work. So I've got that layered into this scene here. What I'm going to do is I've got the opacity turned way down. I'm going to turn it up just for a moment so you can see where our sky footage is actually showing up. You see that? It's on the hood. And I'll tell you what, let's do this. I'm going to temporarily blot out the background. So now you can see this is our mask. This is where footage is coming in, and it is footage of the sky. It's a little bit laggy here because there's a lot going on in this video in Resolve, but you get the idea. There's mountain passing by there, whatever, and we've just set it to where it's subtle. So we're going to cover how to do that because it's a really nice way to make is when you're combining footage of this type from two different sources to make it really the illusion complete. So we're going to cover exactly how to do that. Okay, so to pull this off does require some forethought. There really wouldn't be a way to add this if you didn't plan for it to a certain degree. In our case, we have a demo. And again, refer back to the previous video on driving projection to get the full layout of what I'm talking about there. But we have basically recorded a demo in this game, and I'll go ahead and load up that demo real quick. So what we did in this demo before is we used the camera and positioned it, in the vehicle, and then we hid the model of the vehicle and recorded the entire demo, from the driver's side, from the front, from the side. We set up a camera to do the back, right? So keeping that concept in mind, we're going to do something really similar to that again. But what we're going to do is we're going to cycle through, I think, until we get the hood camera. Yeah, the hood is a good one. And then we're going to use, we've talked about 4 and 6 being a way to turn left and right, which, by the way, how many of you saw the last video? Did you notice that I totally swapped around? I said left when I meant right and vice versa. Don't know what I was thinking. You'd think I would know that by now. So you can also use on the number pad 8 and 2 to look up and down. So we are going to use, we're going to center the view, and we're going to use 8 to look, All right, the hood camera doesn't seem to allow us to look all the way up, but it's probably enough. But I'd like to see what other options there are. So if we hit C, okay, that's an external camera. This is a relative camera. I think this is the one that I can actually, yeah, we could actually go all the way around. So we want to try and get something that looks like it's looking straight up into the sky. Let's hit play here and just make sure. The truck is now doing that strange U-turn as it's getting its footing. Okay, and now it's moving. So basically what we're going to do, and this is it's more effective when there's actually tall stuff on the side of the road, because then you'll catch glimpses of it there. But we want to capture footage of that demo using the same basic method we did last time, but we want to capture it from this looking up into the sky perspective. Now, there's one adjustment that I'm going to recommend before you go recording it. There are shortcut keys for it. It's 9 and 3. Adjusts the field of view. So I would recommend setting the field of view to somewhere around 85 to 90 degrees, somewhere in there. That's wider than normal. It's wider than what you normally did. Now, why are we doing that? Well, we're going to be projecting this essentially onto the hood and the windshield of a car. And those are sloped surfaces. So they are actually taking in reflections from a wider field of view than a flat surface would. So we're going to actually capture the footage at a widened field of view so that when we put it, on our sloped surface, it's going to have that additional width. So yeah, I'm going to put mine at 89.3 degrees. You could try various versions. You can go as much as 120. That's too much, in my opinion. The normal, I think, is somewhere in the 60s. So if you go up to about 90 degrees, maybe just a tad below 90, I'm doing 89.8. Okay? And then we just capture all the footage of the demo from that point of view, using whatever your capture utility is. I use OBS, you might use something else. And again, the effect here is amplified a bit when there's tall stuff. In our demo, we don't have much tall stuff on the sides of the road, so you don't get to see stuff going by. But we basically are on the hood it's like we're on the hood of the car looking straight up and capturing a fairly wide field of view looking straight up into the sky. Okay? So once you've captured that, we're going to head back over into DaVinci Resolve to see exactly what to do with it. Okay, so here we are back in DaVinci Resolve, and I've kind of set up the footage and trimmed away anything unnecessary so we can kind of focus in on what's really happening here. So what we've got is we've got this footage from iClone, and this footage has alpha channel. The way iClone handles alpha channel is it renders it out as a separate file. But basically, you need to make sure that you've got the alpha channel in whatever variety your software uses, that you've got video with alpha channel available for your foreground footage, right? Which this is what we used to be able to open up these holes, so to speak, to have the background footage going by, right? There are some other scenes in here that are in between that use different projection stuff, and we don't do reflections on these. So I've basically set these up to where each of the sections where we need reflection are the ones that have the background footage visible here for us. The real edit is a little bit more complicated than this, but this gets you the general idea. So for these 3 little scenes, we want our reflection going, and we want it to be synchronized with what's going on around the vehicle. So this footage that's used for the rear projection is one of the demos. This is one of the demos that we recorded using the method from the last video on this topic, the driving projection video. Now, the way that I synchronized these once I got all the footages out, all the footage captured from the different perspectives, is I actually created a separate timeline. Your software may refer to these as something else, but there's a separate timeline that I've gotten here where I lined up all the different types of footage. The rear point of view, the passenger side, the driver's side, and the front. and I used the sound from those to synchronize them. And I've got that all laid out here so I can basically grab what I need from here, and all these tracks are all those different perspectives. They're all lined up. So what I did is I did the same thing with the sky footage. Is I captured the sky footage the whole way through the demo, and I lined that up using sound to where it's now synchronized with all these others. It's just basically, this is a reference palette that I put together so that they're synchronized. So I know that I grabbed this section right here. This is the section that I grabbed to put into the background of this episode. That's what these are from, is from that section. And the only reason there's nothing below these is that's when it switched to one of the other camera points of view. I hope that makes sense. But this began, at the beginning of the edit, this began as I had the whole track for the rear projection down here. And actually, I trimmed a little bit off the beginning because some of my footage from iClone, I wanted to trim off the beginning. The reason that's important is when we're now bringing in our piece of sky footage and we want it to line up exactly with the background footage, we need to make sure, first of all, that this file starts at the same time that this file started. So to do that, we need to make sure that it's lined up here the same. Okay, and if we trimmed off something from the beginning of this, like so, then that's what we would line it up to. Okay. Essentially, this is why it's a bad idea to try and add this after the fact. The best case scenario would be that you capture all of these at once, and maybe you need to go back and recapture all the demos at once, and then create yourself an editing file, basically, or a timeline in DaVinci Resolve, and get them all synchronized so that when you bring all this background and reflection footage forward, they're all automatically lined up properly. Okay? So, once we've got those lined up properly, the other thing that's important here is we're going to be using the alpha channel information from this iClone foreground footage to define the area that the reflection from our sky footage will actually occupy. So it's an alpha channel we generated with this footage, but we're going to use it to restrict this footage. There's other ways that you can generate that mask if you wanted to. You could probably do it from a still, but this is the most reliable way to do it, where it's actually pulling it from the video. Okay? So, in order to have that line up properly, there's a few things that have to happen. One is we need to make sure that the beginning of this footage is synchronized. We've already got it synchronized with the background footage below. With this footage, we've got it synchronized with that. But we also need to synchronize its start point with the start point of our iClone footage, because when we pop a moving alpha channel on there, it's going to line up with the original file, right? So the way that I did this is, here's the beginning of my edit. That's where I actually am going to use it. But for the purposes of the alpha channel, I need to drag this over as far as it'll go. And that tells me that's actually the beginning of that clip. And actually, I can tell that that's the case because at the beginning of that clip, she wasn't looking down at her book yet. This is the start of the iClone project. And the reason I trimmed that off is because it's her getting her head into position. It's the physics on the hair activating for those first few frames. So that is definitely the beginning of where this file was rendered out of iClone. That's only something I know because I'm familiar with my footage. You'll know that about your footage. So we want to take the sky and we want to extend it backward from where we cut it on our synchronization board that I showed you. We want to bring that back. That way, we're not moving it on the timeline. So it's still staying synchronized with our background footage here. But the start point that DaVinci Resolve will assume for the file is going to be in line with the iClone footage that we're going to pull the alpha channel from. I'm really sorry if this is confusing. It's very hard to know if I'm communicating this clearly or not. Okay? So, now that we've got it synchronized with the iClone footage, we want to, we've got a problem that is actually easy to solve, but it's one that if you forget about this, it's going to cause some real confusion and headaches. The fact of the matter is we've got iClone footage that in my case was rendered out at 4K resolution and 60 frames per second. So that is the size and frame rate of the alpha channel footage as well. But we're wanting to apply that alpha channel footage to a clip that was video captured from BeamNG.drive at 1080p resolution and 30 frames a second. Now, if you manage to be able to capture your footage in the same resolution and the same frame rate as the original, you don't have to worry about this part that I'm doing. But that can be difficult. Like I didn't have a monitor big enough to capture 4K from that game, and I'm not even certain if that game supports it. So it wouldn't hurt to do this step anyway, but if you have a mismatch in either size or frame rate between your sky footage and where you're going to be bringing your alpha channel from, then you need to do this step. And that is, we're going to right-click on this sky footage clip, and we're going to turn it into a compound clip. And this is normally used in DaVinci Resolve for taking like several layers of clips and non-destructively combining them into one clip for you to manipulate on the timeline. Very useful for that. Helps you keep your editing timeline cleaner once maybe you've done some compositing and for effects or whatever, and you just want to compress it down temporarily. You can always expand it back. We're going to do that even though there's only one clip. We're going to do it just to the sky clip, and I'm just going to call this my sky test, because I'm doing this in my real forgive me, I'm doing this in my real project file for this show, and I need to be able to identify this to delete it later. You can name yours whatever you want. Okay, it's going to create it. Now that clip is named my sky test. Now what are the consequences of what we just did? Well, now DaVinci Resolve treats this clip, it basically, when you make a compound clip, it applies, for the purposes of math and such, it applies the resolution and the frame rate of your timeline's definition. And my timeline is what I want to render out ultimately at the end. So it's set to 4K and 60 frames per second. So even though it's not converting this footage, it's not upsizing, it's not doing anything like that that would distort it or ruin it or whatever, but it will treat it for math purposes as if it is 4K and as if it is 60 frames a second. Which means when we go now to, we're going to lay in the alpha channel, the size won't be an issue. If you tried to lay in an alpha channel for footage that's bigger, then it's not going to line up properly. It doesn't automatically downsize it. It doesn't automatically lower the frame rate. So it creates just a royal mess. This solves all of that with this little step, okay? So now we've got our footage in a compound clip, so it matches the settings of our timeline. Now we need to go into a component of DaVinci Resolve called Fusion. Fusion is basically a very advanced effects and compositing module And we're going to do some relatively simple stuff with it. Okay? So, first of all, let's actually implement the masking that will happen as a result of the alpha channel. Okay? So, what we're going to do is we're going to right-click and choose Add Tool, Matte, M-A-T-T-E, and then Alpha Multiply. This is very similar to what we would do for background footage, if you've ever done this kind of thing before. For just straight up working with alpha channels out of iClone, if you've done that at all, this part of the process is very familiar to you. So we drag that Alpha Multiply node and put it into the chain. And just to explain what these are, media in means this is what we're starting with, our footage, right? And media out is over here on the right-hand side. This is what we end up with once it's been transformed. Now, so far, we haven't actually done anything to it yet. We've just put this alpha multiplier in the chain, but it's not set to do anything yet. So now we want it to do something. In order to do so, it needs an input. It needs an input that has the alpha channel. Now, in our case, iClone renders out alpha channel as a black and white representation. It's not true alpha channel when you're dealing with MP4. It's a graded, on a black to white scale, a graded representation of alpha channel. And it renders that as a separate file. This is it. This is the alpha channel file. I've labeled it as such. I recognize it because it's just like the footage above it, but I tagged the file name with alpha for this second rendering. So this is the black and white thing I was talking about. I'll bring it over here and I'm going to open it up in the left-hand panel so you can see what it looks like. That's the alpha channel, so to speak. That's the luminant representation of an alpha channel. So we're going to take that and we're going to drag its output into the input of alpha multiply. Okay. Then we're going to click on the alpha multiply node, and we need to tell it how to interpret this information. So it needs to multiply by the mask. Multiply by the mask means that black will be essentially ignored, and white will be where the footage comes through. This is almost like a gate. That, you know, our footage comes into media 1 here. It's going to pass through this filter, so to speak, and the end result will be only where there's white will footage actually show through. So the other thing that we have to adjust on alpha multiply is we need to change the channel from alpha, because it's not true alpha channel. We need to tell it to use luminance. That's the black to white scale. Okay, so now you can clearly see the sky footage, which the original looked like this, but now that it's run through our mask, okay, so it is filtering it through that. Now, think about this. We want what the reflection would look like from us looking at the front of the car. But the way this footage was recorded was looking out the front of the car and then straight up. So the net result of that is this image is flipped from what it really would be, because we were facing the other direction. You know what I'm saying? So we will need to flip the footage while still having this mask go on. It needs to flip left to right. So to do that, we're going to click away from any of the existing nodes. This is all still within this same Fusion file here. And we're going to hit Shift Space and type in Transform. And you're looking for the one that says Transform, and then it has like XF. There's a few different transform nodes that will come up here. This is the one that works, is Transform XF. And so that one's highlighted. We click Add. It's going to pop it into our view here. Okay. Now we're going to redirect the output of the sky file, media 1. We're going to redirect that out of that into the transform node, and then take the transform node's output and put it into the alpha multiply. Now you want to make sure that you use the yellow input node on the transform node. That's the direct input. The blue is used for something else. Okay? Now, we're going to click on the transform node, and the only transformation that we need to happen is we need to flip it left to right, and there's a little button right here to do that. Boom. All right? Now, the reflection is going to line up with what one really would see looking at the front of the car. So that's that. That saves automatically. You can just go back to the edit timeline. And here we are. Now, it's not real pretty at this point because the the sky that we're letting bleed through is coming through at full opacity. So it's obscuring what's underneath. So with the sky test footage selected, you want to go over here to the inspector panel under video and then look for composite. And you can play with different compositing modes if you'd like to, but I find normal works just fine. And you want to drag the opacity down to your taste. Now mine, I'm keeping it pretty subtle, so I drag it down all the way to below 20. And I'm just going to quickly scroll through the timeline. And do you see the reflection there near him? Let me bring up the opacity so you can see it. You see that? That means that there is a mountain coming up on his side, and because we captured it at higher field of view, it's going to see more to the sides, like a curved surface would. Okay? And if we held this shot for long enough, we would actually see the tall mountain. There you go. That's what we had seen reflecting just a moment before. It ends up being a really convincing illusion. So that's that. Now, we don't need reflection on these other scenes, but if we did, the alpha channel is there too. But we're going to cut that away because on these side views, I opted not to do reflection. However, a little further down the line, there is another return to the front. We want reflection to be happening here too. And so there it is. It's very subtle. And again, you can adjust this to your own taste. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut away the bits of reflection that I don't need in my edit and keep only the ones that I do. And that's what we end up with. Over here at the beginning, I can nudge these, the beginning of these clips back into place the same way that I extended them out, because things will stay aligned at this point. So we can jump to any point in the footage and it's doing the reflections the way that it's supposed to. Now, one final note, and that is on the reflection. Obviously, you can do different levels of opacity depending on what your situation is. This is all to taste. And you can change the opacity mode if you want to. You can try out different things there. Some of them work better than others. Add works fairly well. But it does have some effect on color, and that may or may not be desirable. So you can adjust that to taste. You could also, if you wanted this to not be quite so clear like it is here, like this is a very clean and perfectly reflective surface, essentially. And so the footage has a lot of detail, the reflection has a lot of detail in it. But you could add some blur to whatever degree you want and have it be, more of a hazy looking reflection. You see that? And again, that's all really dependent on what your scene calls for, whether or not you want blur or you want it crisp like that. Now, if you have any issues with adding blur, obscuring the edge of the mask, it shouldn't. But if you do have issues with that, then you could go back into Fusion and add a node in here to blur the footage before it even passes through the mask. I'm not going to walk through that because I don't do that process, but you can. You can basically hit Shift Space and look for Gaussian blur, and you can introduce the Gaussian blur into the chain in here and have more control over where it gets inserted. Technically, over there on the timeline, when we insert Gaussian blur, it's happening after all this masking has taken place. So it could be adding blur would make this kind of shine outside the edges of the mask. Now, maybe that's the effect you want. It's almost a glow, right? But that's the way you would do that to keep it under control and still have it be blurry. By the way, any of the fusion stuff that you do, I strongly recommend you do that before you go cutting away the footage you don't need like I did. Because if you do make changes to that late, then you're going to have to go and do that fusion step. At that point, these are treated as 3 different clips, so you'll have to go and do those fusion changes on every instance. So it's better to make those choices if you can before you've cut up the footage and gotten rid of the stuff you don't need. Okay? So yeah, that is that. It's hopefully the process made a little more sense from you seeing what I did than me trying to talk about it and explain it. But, you know, essentially we captured camera straight up from the hood of the car. We brought it into DaVinci Resolve. We ran it through the alpha mask filter from our foreground footage so that it conforms to that shape. We opted not to add blur, but you could add blur. We flipped it in the transform so that it's lining up right. And voila. Then we adjusted the opacity in the composite section of the clip. So that is how you do moving synchronized reflections with BeamNG, and in our case, iClone. Hope this was helpful. Have a great day. Thanks.